So this is the second half of the video titled The Cause of Crisis, and in this part I'm going to talk about what's been happening in the last couple of years, and particularly what happened in 2019 and 2020. So in the first video we established that all crises under the current production relations, under the current mode of production, are crises of relative overproduction, which means that products are getting overproduced, but only in relation to solvent demand. People would like to buy this or that product, but they just don't have enough money. The vast majority of people, in the case of the vast majority of people, their purchasing power is extremely limited, and is limited because of the production relations that we have at the moment. And this picture over here perfectly sums up the contradiction. So anyway, let's look at what was happening in 2019. I have a brochure over here which I will link in the description. I found it on the internet. It's very, very good, and it's called What is Happening and Why. And it has several chapters, and one of them is called Crisis-19. I highly recommend that you read this brochure. So let's check out the fourth chapter, this Crisis-19 chapter. Let's give it a quick read. In 2019, the world was on the verge of yet another cyclical crisis of overproduction. The disease entered an acute phase at the end of that year in the world factory China, although the incubation period could be seen even earlier in many other countries. In the article titled History 2019, Protests in Every Corner of the World, The New Yorker wrote, "When historians look back at 2019, the story of the year will not be the turmoil surrounding Donald Trump. It will instead be the tsunami of protests that swept across 6 continents and engulfed both liberal democracies and ruthless autocracies. Throughout the year, movements have emerged overnight out of nowhere, unleashing public fury on a global scale." End of quote. Global stock markets became feverish in the early days of 2020. Bourgeois, which means mainstream paid for by the largest corporations, propaganda claims that this was caused by the pandemic, by this thing. I don't know if I can actually name it, or I want to avoid censorship for this video, so I will not say any of the words that can take this video down. So anyway, the mainstream propaganda claims that this was caused by the thing that shall not be named, but what had been happening in the economy of China and the world before December 2019, when reports of a mysterious disease in Wuhan appeared on television. In September 26, 2019 article, China's Economic Slowdown, How Bad Is It?, the BBC writes about the worst slowdown of the Chinese economy in several decades. Vox magazine of August 15, 2019 writes, "Economists, investors and market observers have started to sound a little extra gloomy when it comes to their economic predictions in recent days. Bank of America and Goldman Sachs have warned of a rising risk of recession, and the infamous yield curve, more on that later, is signaling things might soon get dark. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell by 800 points on Wednesday, marking its worst day of 2019 and prompting CNBC to declare in an ominously red graphic, "Markets in turmoil." If we type into the search engine the words "new economic crisis, recession risk, global recession 2019" and the like, we will see many headlines from major mainstream publications warning of an impending new global economic crisis. The Guardian newspaper of September 25th, 2019 writes, "Weaker growth in both advanced and developing countries means the possibility of a global recession in 2020 is a clear and present danger, the UN has warned." So basically, regardless of reports of some mysterious new disease in one of China's largest industrial centers, only a coincidence, you understand, back in the summer and fall of 2019, the leading capitalist economists, mainstream economists, knew perfectly well that the world economy was on the verge of another abyss, and that a collapse would soon follow. And their predictions proved to be quite correct, as we know. With the arrival of the crisis followed the standard measures of treatment in a somewhat unconventional form. Although if you read a little bit of the history of crisis over the past 20 years, it is easy to see that the disguise of anti-crisis measures as an epidemic has already taken place several times in the past, only the scale was unprecedented. Of course, capitalists saw the abyss and its size long before they fell into it. After all, they are quite used to it. They knew that another economic collapse, even worse than 2008, would not only result in an uncontrolled growth of the already strong protest movement, but also in the awakening of the broad masses of proletarians from their class hibernation. Proletarians basically means hired workers, hired labor, which is the absolute majority of people on this planet. After the collapse of the world economy in 2008, many rushed to read Marx, and some, even bourgeois scholars and intellectuals, began to say that this situation could not go on. We need another economic model. All of these perspectives were rightly perceived by the largest capital as a deadly threat, and a plan of preventive measures was prepared in advance. In 2019, without hiding, capitalists held a rehearsal of this thing, which shall not be named, titled Event 201. Event 201 was a 3.5-hour pandemic tabletop exercise that simulated a series of dramatic, scenario-based, facilitated discussions confronting difficult, true-to-life dilemmas associated with response to a hypothetical but scientifically plausible this thing that should not be named. Here is another interesting quote from a Russian article by the CEO of a large investment company, Mikhail Khanov, titled "Pandemic Masks Cyclical Crisis of the World Economy." It would seem surprising how powerful a blow to the global economy can be delivered by a disease whose death rate is lower than that of the well-known flu. But we would not be fooled into thinking that all the current problems are caused purely by the spread of this thing. We would venture to guess that what we are witnessing is the beginning of a natural cyclical crisis, which has turned out to be this thing. Basically, it's a cover-up for this cyclical crisis. Thus, this scam, pre-planned and rehearsed, served as an ideological cover for the following anti-crisis and anti-protest measures. Reduction contraction of production by closing production sites, transferring enterprises to a part-time work week, quarantining workers without pay, etc. This was done to allow old goods to gradually dissipate and suspend production of new ones. Physical destruction of surplus products, millions of cattle, millions of tons of milk, vegetables, fruit, millions of Dutch mink, and so on. Inflation of prices to compensate for losses, artificial creation of consumer frenzy, concealing the fact that supply chain disruptions are the result of plant closures and other consequences of the crisis and measures to overcome it. For example, delaying the delivery of commodities onto the market, holding them up at seaports and storage facilities to keep the price from falling. Reduction of workforce, some of which has become surplus due to the contraction of production. Liquidation of small and medium-sized enterprises, smaller capitalists, to fill their niche in the market. Reduction of social spending, especially on education and healthcare. Cuts among state employees who get paid from the state budget have been covered up with this thing that shall not be named, mandates which forced many people to resign voluntarily. School and university closures, that is, cuts in spending on heating, electricity, school meals, etc., have been covered up with lockdowns. Fighting the rising tide of protests and revolutionary uprisings caused by the crisis and the measures taken to overcome it. This fight is carried out through intimidation and demoralization, splitting and segregating the population, bans on meetings, mask mandates, curfews, etc. Intensification of economic exploitation, abolition of benefits, bonuses, non-payment of wages, prolonged working hours, reduction of benefits. The invention of new sources of profit, forcing millions of people to buy products that they don't need. Billions in profits have been pumped into the pockets of the largest capitalist corporations through government contracts at the expense of the state budget. Shielding mass airline bankruptcies caused by the capital's crisis with lockdowns. So I highly recommend to read this brochure, to read it very thoroughly. Thank you very much for listening. See you next time. Bye bye.